That's an interesting one because everybody tends to say in this country, and they're right to say it, that it was popularized. The Christmas tree came into being in the days of Queen Victoria. I mean, the Victorians were enormously big into Christmas trees, absolutely loved it. But it all actually, that side of it goes back to an engraving of Victoria and Albert and the children keeping Christmas. The engraving was printed in 1848. So everybody sort of points at that engraving and goes, that's it, that's what I... But no, because there was a Queen Charlotte who was alive before that. She was the wife of George III. I think she was something like 1761. I think she became queen when she married George, and she died in 1818, and she brought a Christmas tree over. So it was nothing new, sort of 50, 60, 70, 80 years before there were Christmas trees, in Balmoral and, in Buckingham Palace and all that. They had trees then. But the tree itself, the origins of that, I believe, is Viking. I think it's a Viking Norse tradition. In their temples, if you like, in the places that they worshipped, they would bring evergreen into the temples. So that's your origins of this idea of never dying. Something that could live through a really harsh winter and remain green. It's that wish for the return of spring, which then spills out. I mean, yes, it's a Germanic thing. It's kind of a Anglo-Scandinavian thing to have a Christmas tree, but then it spills out as well into things like, okay, mistletoe doesn't die. And that's got Druidic origins because it's very special in the Druidic tradition. Holly doesn't die, so we bring that in because that, again, that's an evergreen. So that is all going back to this idea that they decorated temples with things that just didn't die, didn't pass away. And I'm not quite sure how it's become so popular. And it's, from that one engraving in 1848 now, there's a tree everywhere. Every town square, every house, everybody's got these trees that they bring in. I like the idea of having a tree with a ball of roots that you can plant out, one that actually, survives beyond Christmas. I mean, the ones I've got are fake, so I just wheel them out every year. It's so nothing dies, as it were. It's ironic, actually, the number of Christmas trees that get wiped out, every Christmas, and yet they're supposed to represent life. It's some strange contradiction.
What about decorating the Christmas tree? Is that something that the Vikings used to do, or is that something that came along later?
Well, Christmas decorations are interesting because the engraving of 1848 that kind of fired it all up, it just shows a few Christmas baubles. But it's known, for example, going back, I mean, I'm jumping around a bit here, go all the way back to the Roman festivals. So 100, 200, 300, 400 AD, possibly tipping into early Saxon times. They decorated loads of things over the Christmas periods, doorways, windows, buildings. The Romans clearly had glass as well. Glass was extraordinarily special. And the Vikings had no idea how glass was made. So, one tiny little glass bead was equal to a silver coin to the Vikings because they had no concept of where this magical stuff came from. So when you start pushing all of that together, by the time you're into sort of late Saxon, early Viking times, decorating using valuable objects becomes the next step. So, excuse me. So that's not just the baubles, it's not just the glass, it's other things. So the exchanging of gifts goes back to the Roman times. They did that in the run up to Christmas. They did it in their Saturnalia. They actually gave that the giving of gifts. But gifts can also be hung on a tree as decorations. Your baubles, your glass. I suppose that's Roman, but I'm more inclined to think the Vikings did that. Shiny things, coins, anything that's valuable, that would end up on a Christmas tree. I think tinsel's much later. Tinsel is very much a sort of, I think that came in after the First World War. I think if you look at what was happening during the wars, I think people just wanted things to be bright, and shiny. So, I can remember my mum and dad back in well, my mum and dad were born in the 1930s. They had stuff left over. I was born in the 60s. So when they got their trunk of Christmas stuff out, it was full of tinsel and ornaments and things you stuck on the tree. But they went back to the 1950s, the 1940s. My mum, it was interesting. My mum kept everything. She never threw anything away. And she still had a little glass bird with a clip on it that you clipped on the Christmas tree that was her great grandma's bird. So you're going back to the 1890s, you're going back to the 1880s, so clearly it was a massive tradition towards the end of the Victorian era. It was really popular by the 1870s, 1880s to decorate the tree. As for the fairy stuck on top, well, I know a joke about that actually, because the fairy came in at the very end and had a Christmas tree left over and said to Santa, "What can I do with this?" And she's been stuck up there ever since. I hope you don't get banned for me saying that. That's a terrible joke, but there you go.
That's a good
uh,
one.
no, I think the fairies, the angels, isn't it? The angels that appeared around the nativity. That's the fairy. But that depends which gospel you read, and it depends in your belief system. The early angels were believed to be no different from us, apart from the fact they don't reproduce. So you don't have a male or a female angel; they have no particular gender. So there you go. They're supposed to look very much like us. Go on, having completely ruined the entire podcast with my joke.